is fragile. Leaders don't win by speaking more, they win by speaking with precision, empathy, and intention. Communication intelligence is no longer a soft skill, it's an operating system for influence. AI is amplifying messages, misinformation is accelerated cycles, cyber incidents are reshaping reputations in hours, and hybrid teams demand clarity without constant proximity. The leaders who can communicate under pressure across cultures, conflict, and complexity will earn authority and move outcomes. Today, we are joined by Kavina Elavarasan, an international speaker, author of High Performance Leaders into Influencing Leaders Through Communication Intelligence. The episode is about turning words into trust, meeting, and momentum, leadership into measurable impact. Before we dive into the topic, let's have a small video about power of knowing. Let's welcome Kavina to the podcast and dive into the topic. Hi, Kavina. Welcome to our podcast. Good evening. And how are you today, Kavina?
Hello, hi Prem. It's lovely to be here doing this session with you. I've been really great. Thank you very much. How are you?
Great, Kavina. It's great having, and we are also coming to know that you have launched your book. Congratulations for that, and welcome to the podcast. And let's dive into the topic. What is communicational intelligence, and why it is becoming a new leadership currency, Kavina?
Great. Thank you, Prem, for asking such an important question. As this particular topic, communication intelligence, sits right at the heart of leadership today. So, now coming to what is communication intelligence, the definition goes like this: communication intelligence is the ability to shape how our messages are understood, felt emotionally, and remembered. So, these understood, felt emotionally, and remembered are the core theme of communication intelligence. And you also asked, why is it becoming the new leadership currency? Why? Because if you look at all the conventional communication theorems and frameworks and rules that we have learned, right, we have essentially been told that communication is all about clarity, be it our transactional model. Earlier, we started with communication being a linear model. There is a sender, there is a receiver, the sender sends, the receiver receives. So that's where we started. And then we had an evolution into transactional. They added a feedback loop, and then they said that communication is transactional. And the third level, we have Aristotle, who spoke about ethos, logos, pathos, and then we had the four C's of communication, right? How to be, speaking with clarity, conciseness, completeness, and all that. So now, when we look so far, how we looked at communication is only that communication is about clarity, but clarity alone doesn't create influence. Influence happens when our messages lands on people emotionally, and then it makes sense intellectually, and then moves people to act, and that is true influence. And why is it becoming very important these days is that we're all living in this AI world where AI is creating content at a huge scale. And also in the AI world, with more content, what is diminishing is our attention. And now they are telling that our attention span is much lesser than even a goldfish. So, unfortunately, we live in a world where tension and AI creating this content is where we are. So the differentiator, if we look at, right, is no longer in what we say, what kind of clarity that we bring in. It's how people experience us when we communicate, and that to emotionally experience. And that's why communication intelligence is becoming the leadership currency, because leaders are not just managing work anymore. They are shaping perception, they are shaping trust, and most importantly, creating alignment with the whole team. So that is why.
Great, Kavina. What we understand is new currency that we are looking at is the communication intelligence, right? Now, what is communication intelligence and what does it include that good communication misses?
Again, a beautiful question as to what this good communication misses and what is there inclusive as a part of communication intelligence. So before we go in, I wanted to mention that our communication is not experienced intellectually first. Our communication is experienced emotionally first. That's the hard fact of communication. It is before that we start speaking words, people can understand how are we, what is the intention that we are bringing in. They can relate to the presence that we are bringing into a conversation. So now going back to what good communication misses, good communication focuses on expression. Okay, I have something to say and I'll say it as clearly as possible to another person. But communication intelligence rather focuses on that emotional experience that they communication intelligence can create, and that will create impact and influence, and very two important leadership capabilities those are. So it includes what most of the good communication frameworks that we have had so far, what it includes is that number one, the situational awareness, understanding what which situation we are in, who are the people who are a part of this conversation, which moment needs what. The second one is emotional regulation. First of all, before we speak, our presence speaks. And how do we regulate our presence is through emotional regulation, managing our internal state. And the third part that I wanted to talk about is the intentional framing that we do. Intentional framing. So we spoke about communication intelligence is the ability to shape the messages to be understood, to be felt emotionally, and to be remembered. So now how do we intentionally frame our messages so that it lands on people really well? So this is what is a shift that we will make from being a good communicator to becoming communicationally intelligent.
Great pointers there. I think the extract completely says how communication is becoming more important because in the world of AI generated content, important is how do we communicate, and the human skill plays a major role here is what we are seeing. What are the core pillars of communication intelligence? Clarity, emotional regulation, intent, listening, framing, feedback loops. What are the core pillars?
The number one core pillar of communication intelligence is the concept of emotional aftertaste. If you look at what is emotional aftertaste, after every communication or interaction, there is an emotion that is left behind the communication. Let's now look at it how it works. Right. If I ask you, Prem, if you can go back and think about one conversation that you have recently had with a stranger, maybe in the lift, or you met somebody in a conference. Now, if I would like to ask you, how would you explain that conversation to be? Was
I
it
would like to be more a coordinal conversation and an informative sharing that I want, and it should have something to be giving as a clarity to it is what I feel, Kavina. So your take on it, Kavina.
brilliant? So the first one that you said is a cordial relationship, right?
Right.
And what does it actually signify is an emotion that we are actually putting together for a conversation that we might have had. So if we go back and think about what was the exact words, sentences, we may forget. We actually forget. And that's what a psychologist Hebbingus has actually told, that within 48 hours, people forget 90 percentage of the content that they've heard. The words, the sentences, the structure of grammar, all of that. Why? Not because the content is weak, but because we need emotion. And anything with emotion is what goes into our long term memory. The rest of it will go into our short term memory. So, emotional aftertaste is all the more important because if we are not leaving an emotional impact as a part of our communication, people will forget everything that we have spoken. And the great thing about this emotional aftertaste is that it is either positive or it is negative. There's nothing in between, just neutral. And very importantly, that emotional aftertaste, the emotion that is lingering after the communication, is what decides whether people have to come and speak to us. As you mentioned, you wanted to create that cordial relationship. Why? Because we want people to come back and be in talking terms with us, be working with us. We love for people to come back and work with us, right? So that is what, the emotional aftertaste is what shapes what action they are going to take next. And thereby, I wanted to say one of the huge pillar of communication intelligence is this emotional aftertaste. And if we know that this emotional aftertaste is more important than the words that we speak, the content that we speak, we will be becoming more influential as human beings, as leaders.
Great, Kavina. So I think we need to have a clarity. You need to have a proper emotional regulation that we need to look at. With that, you can start now. What's one common high performer communication habit that silently destroys influence?
Oh, yeah. That's a very wonderful question. And I want to go to one habit that really destroys influence. So, one of these common habits that I have seen in high performers, very specially, is that they over explain, they over communicate. They think giving more detail means we are giving more clarity, but in reality, it actually signals overwhelm to people because too much of information to brain will lead the brain to overwhelm, and thereby people will shut down. And I've seen this in my own life, and that's when I learned that over explaining is something that everybody should stop doing. 3 4 years back, I was leading a global team, a cross functional global team, and there was this person in one of the locations. He was a technical expert of that entire team, coming with a huge, vast experience, depth of experience as well. But what interestingly that I saw is that every time he opened his mouth to talk in a meeting, I could literally see people shutting down in the meeting. And I was trying to understand what is happening. And I went in depth to understand why is this happening over and over again. And what I realized, I came to the conclusion after speaking with people, is that he talks really long. His content is right. His expertise is really in depth. His title is he the technical expert, right? So that is when I realized that people do not worry much for the title, for the expertise, for the content that people speak. If somebody is over explaining, it overwhelms the brain and thereby they shut down. So, over explaining is something that I would say is one of the habits that works opposite to influence. And that's something, if we can take care, we'll be more influential.
I think what we are saying is it define it as a repeatable system and not personality. Give a clean distinction. Communication skill versus communication intelligence is what we are saying. Situational awareness, outcome design, emotional control, plus building a trust is what we want to look at when we communicate, is what we are saying. The future belongs to the leaders who can design conversations, not just survive them, is what you are saying, right? So that's the point. That how
Yes.
does influence work today when teams are hybrid, attention is fragmented, and you have AI everywhere? So that's the challenge that we see today. Your take on it?
Sure. That's again a very relevant question for today's world. How is influence in today's world? So I would say influence in today's world is less about visibility and more about credibility under pressure. Now, why do I say it? Is that earlier consistency was what over time built trust. If you ask somebody a decade back, how do you build trust? Be consistent is something that we quite often hear, consistency over time. But today, one meeting, one email, one message, one crisis situation at office, and how does a leader respond? In one instance, the influence is defined. It's not anymore about consistency, but now it is about one meeting, one email, and one message. So leaders today need to operate with what I call the signal discipline. Now, what do I mean by signal discipline? It has three steps. One is very clear framing of the messages that they want to pass on to. The second is having crisp asks or call to action, so that it is very clear that it is not camouflaged with different words, but very crisply what is the ask, so that the rest of the team understands what is that something that they will have to give back. And visible follow through of these three things is what I call the signal discipline. If it could be done really well in a crisp manner, we really can become influential in today's world. Because in a noisy world as today, as you mentioned, AI, a lot of content, you open Instagram and there's huge content coming in. Authority today comes from the signal and not from the volume. And by volume, we are all doing a lot of communication overload today. How do we cut through the noise and reach out to people with that crisp signal discipline is what matters today. That's my opinion on it.
Very true, because you have content coming left, right, center from all areas, right? So you find faceless videos coming in, you have audio text coming in, you have WhatsApp messages giving lot of information, and it is a information overload, is what we've seen, right? So attention is completely fragmented today. And with that, what has changed about credibility and authority in the last 2 3 years? Because that's where we see the adoption of AI or tools and the social media gaining more popularity. So how or what has changed about credibility and authority?
A lot has changed. I could see a visible difference when I started my career to what it is right now. Earlier, authority came from position, the title. And today, where we are standing, there's huge disruptions which has happened. COVID happened, virtual teams happened, and now Gen Zs are there in the workplace. And the cultural change also has been very drastic. Now, the authority comes from the communication of the leaders with clarity, and if we can shape the emotional climate of the team, and that's where the authority can come from, and that's where the influence is also born. So this is what I tell leaders have something really remarkable. Now, discounting the position from it, we all follow leaders, and there's in neuroscience also there's something called as mirror neurons. There's a specialized cells in our brain. So the work of this mirror neurons is that if it looks at an emotion, even though it is not a part of that drama, it mirrors that emotion. Likewise, in a team, whatever is the communication intelligence, the presence of the leader, the intention of the leader, everything is mirrored by the entire team. And that's the beauty of being a leader. So now what I tell the leaders is that leaders need not be a thermometer of the team who checks on what is the emotional climate of the team. Become a thermostat, because with the mirror neuron example that I spoke about, leaders can completely become a thermostat and regulate the emotional climate of the team. And that's the beauty that leaders can have. So, thereby, earlier it was the authority came from position, and today authority can be coming from how are we regulating the emotional climate of the entire team.
Right. So I think the climate matters when we look at the communication coming in. The culture matters with the shift happening, and that's where what does a leader need to do differently in virtual first and cross culture environments?
Absolutely. Again, a change in the workplace, right? We are going completely virtual and a lot more cross cultural as well. And it is good as a part of our workplace evolution. So, now coming to the question, in virtual environments, what we generally do is we lose context of our communication. So, one thing that I would quickly want to tell all the leaders who are leading virtual and cross cultural teams is over design your clarity, because that becomes the primary when it becomes a virtual and cross cultural team, and losing a lot of context. And again, in cross cultural environments, you don't assume alignment, you create alignment explicitly, and creating that alignment is the second most thing important thing when it comes to a cross cultural and the virtual teams. Because again, as I mentioned, the context is what we lose out when there is big teams and there's virtual teams, and more importantly cross cultural team. So the alignment is another thing which is very important, and it can be, the beauty of that is that it could be coming in through communication. And again, emotional aftertaste is a very useful concept when we have to create that alignment through the aftertaste that we can be driving in. So I would say over design clarity, create alignment quite explicitly. So these are two things which will help us.
Thank you for that, Kavina. I think what you are saying is offer a practical model. Influence equals clarity and consistency and evidence. Plus empathy is what you're saying. Mention signals over noise, because that's what you're saying. More noise, there is no clarity. If you give it behaviors, concise framing, crisp ask, and a follow up through is what we should look at, is what you're saying in pointers, where I think first is eliminate the noise. That's what you're saying. In the era of AI, your words must carry proof, not a volume, that you are saying. And what is the language of influence in the boardroom versus the team floor, and how do leaders switch these codes?
Great. That's a very thoughtful question, Prem. Thanks for that. So, language of influence in boardrooms versus teams. I look at it as two modes: decision language and execution language. In boardroom, the leaders need to communicate in decisions, right? What are we choosing? What are the trade-offs in our decision, and what is the risk that comes along with our decision? So it's always about decisions when it comes to boardroom. Whereas in teams, the leaders need to communicate in clarity. We spoke about the signal discipline, right? How clear can we give out our communication? How do we put our asks crisply? And how do we have visible follow throughs? So these are the three things about the signal discipline that we spoke about. So in teams, leaders need to communicate in clarity. What matters? Why does it matter? And what has to happen next? So if we look at leaders in the boardroom and leaders in the teams, same leaders, but different language. And influence is also about which language to be choosing in which particular team. And that is influence.
I think what we are getting to know is leaders to a leader speak a different language. Leaders speaking to the team have a different language because their level of understanding is different
Mm.
while we communicate something. So the communication should be looked at level 1 to level 1, level 5 to level 5. So that's the way you need to look at communication, is what I am trying to get, right? So now, how should leaders communicate with boards, CXOs, like risk decisions, trade-offs, evidence, and accountability pieces? So your take on it.
Sorry, can you repeat that question in boardrooms?
How do leaders communicate with boards and CXOs, right? Where we find there are a lot of risk decisions that are to be looked at. There are a lot of trade-offs that we should be looking at, and evidence and some of the accountability questions also which raise, right, when we go into the boards and CXOs. How should they communicate?
Sure. So in the boardroom, it is all about decisions that we will have to be discussing about. And quite often, when I talk about this boardroom communication, I always remember Indra Nui. And boardroom communication of Indra Nui was widely spoken about. And in boardroom, when she brings in a case, a case study, or a decision, it always that people have taken what is the projection that she has given, what is the case study that she has given, or what is the proposal that she has given, and why? Because when somebody asked her, a news reporter asked her what was her strategy and why was her boardroom communication being the best, she told that it is always the preparation that goes behind the boardroom communication, the numbers, the facts, and thinking from 365 degrees of what people can be bringing in about the proposal. So that being one preparation. And the second thing is, when while we are presenting, it is also very important to present the case in a way that it wins the the audience vote as well. I mean the board members vote. For example, the huge thing that I have heard about the boardroom communication about Indra Nui is that she was trying to change the portfolio of PepsiCo. While PepsiCo was all about carbonated drinks, she was the one who brought in the oats and various other healthy meal. So the value proposition that she brought was not about adding something into the portfolio, but adding healthy items into the portfolio. So always looking at it from the perspective of what is important for the board members. I think that's the angle aspect that I wanted to bring in when we talk about the boardroom communication.
Got it, Kavina. Now, how should leaders communicate with teams? Because you will have to give them a context, right? Then you will have to put purpose, then you will have to put their priorities, and psychological safety also has to be looked at, right? And execution clarity, because each pointer has to be given and a dependency to it and a mapping to it. So how should the leaders communicate with teams with these pointers?
Great. So you already very well laid out the points that a leader is supposed to communicate to the team members. And those are the aspects that will make a leader win along with the teams. The vision, the purpose, the clarity, the execution plan, all of that being laid out in a clear manner. So, in addition to this, there's one thing that I wanted to add, which improves the psychological safety, is that the emotional aftertaste that we discussed, right? What kind of an emotion that I want to leave after my communication. So, if leaders can constantly prioritize safety as the emotional aftertaste, it will really create that psychological safety with people and move the teams from performing just performing to performing out of passion, and that in turn creates high performing teams. And that's one thing that I wanted to highlight, along with the clarity that a leader would like to bring in, the signal discipline that we spoke about. If we can constantly commit to creating emotional aftertaste, which is safety, the rest would really work in favor of the entire team and their success.
Got it, Kavina. So What we are saying is it should not be a voice that we should look at as an influence. It is the right voice for the room, and that voice should be in a position to navigate, guide, and support them, right? So what are the
True.
top 5 communication mistakes that reduce leaders credibility instantly?
Great. So there's this five quick ones, or I would say shifts that I would like to highlight when we talk about the mistakes. Number one is over explaining. We just saw that. If we can move or shift from over explaining to structured clarity, it really helps in people absorbing what is that the leader has to communicate. Number two is to shift from control language to taking them to a commitment language. Now, what do I mean by that is that if the leaders can reduce or shift from they speaking, they're controlling the conversation, telling them what to do, how to do, why to do, rather than that, if they can go with the commitment based, let's say ask questions. When do you think this can be done? How do you think this we can do it this way? So shifting from control to commitment, when we do control kind of a communication, what we get is compliance, and compliance is just following without passion, but commitment is performance with passion. So moving from control to commitment. Another one that I wanted to talk about is defensiveness to asking questions with curiosity. So defensiveness is no, no, don't tell me this. Why did you come to me late? Or straight away defending anything that is being told by the team. So, for example, we are talking about we are in a crisis situation when a team member comes and tells that I knew that this will come like this because I forecasted a risk earlier. And that moment, if the leader turned defensive, it is not going to work out at all, right? So then what happens is that we will have to shift from defensiveness and asking with curiosity. And why do I say ask with curiosity? Is that when you ask questions, you simply ask why, what, how. No, if we can ask questions out of curiosity, why did you do? How did you do? And that's something that can help people, move from again commitment to compliance. So these are top two that I would say that the shifts that a leader can do so that the leadership communication is more influential.
Got it, Kavina. I think that is very important, is what I say. I think which mistake shows up most in senior leaders? Over explaining, defensive vague commitments, mixed messages, or delayed decisions.
I would still want to choose over explaining, where we have already seen. If you ask me another one, I would say mixed messages. Giving mixed messages weakens the team collaboration as well. It overall weakens the team. If we can shift from giving out mixed messages with replacing it with consistent clarity, that will work out better for influential leaders.
Now, what mistakes? I think that's over explaining is one of the big issues that we see, and what replacement behaviors build instant trust, because we look at people to be trusted at once we look at a person. So how should that person look when he can build that instant trust?
Instant trust, is it?
Yeah.
Great. So I want to go to this neuroscience and answer this question because it's high neuroscience. So what happens is when the brain gets too much of content to process, it overwhelms and it shuts down.
Okay.
In the other hand, if we get very clear, structured signal or communication from anyone, then it is easier for the brain to process. It's called fluency, right?
Okay.
The simpler the messages are given to brain, it is really easy for the brain to get the content and churn out the outcome. So in the result, What brain does is, you've given me very simple inputs. Now I will reward you with something called as trust.
Trust.
So, one thing that I would want the leaders listening to our conversation is that, please don't overload your team or anybody around you with too much of communication. The more simpler, the more clearer, the more consistent it is, the brain is going to reward you with trust, and the team is going to start trusting you very soon. And that's the easiest way that a person can become trustworthy among their team members.
I think what you are saying is, first is the comfort that a person gives when you look at, make it sharp and useful. Replace this that, because include one line of a body language, a tone in virtual meetings. All these can bring trust, because you will feel comfortable when the tone is soft and you are able to communicate clearly. So I think that's one point. Credibility is built in minutes and lost in one sentence. I think that's an important point. We should look at it. You you have that communication going very smoothly, and one long sentence will kill the whole communication, and the trust is lost. How should leaders communicate under pressure? Because leaders work under pressure, right? So that is the conflict, crisis, high stake failures. Because how should they communicate under pressure?
True. Prem, you beautifully told that the credibility has taken a long time to be built, but it just takes few seconds to come down crashing. And that crashing moment is generally under pressure, and that's when communication breaks for the leader as well. So I use a simple protocol. Number one step is to pause. Pause for that moment and name the reality as to what is happening. And the next step that we have to do is to acknowledge what is the situation happening, and then state the intent of what we have to do. Let's say there is a burning situation, customer has called, they are saying, you have not delivered, we are going to cut off our client relationship. So how would that's like a high pressure situation for a leader. Now if they are going to walk into a team meeting under that same pressure and communicate, imagine the catastrophe that can happen, right? So, first is to pause, then is to name the reality as to what really is happening. The customer is frustrated, wants to cut off. Acknowledge the impact. If we are going to carry the same pressure into the meeting room, into the team, what is the impact that we are going to further worsen the situation, right? And then state the intent. When we are there in a meeting, I think this works really beautifully. If leaders start to state the intent of, this is what I want to, this is my intention of this communication. Maybe my word of choice might be different, but my intention is plain simply that we have to succeed as a team in this whole difficult situation. It's as simple as that. And then decide the next steps along with the team. The shift from control to commitment. If we can start asking questions with curiosity, we can definitely decide and move to the next step as a team. So, what I generally see, Prem, is that most leaders skip the pause at the starting, and that's where everything starts breaking. So, the number one thing that I tell people is that, please pause, because in pressure, more than our words, our presence is carrying that pressure into the team meetings. And how many of us have seen that in a glass room, team members are sitting and they are happily chit chatting. The moment the boss arrives, you see a complete shift in the vibe of the whole team. And why does that happen? Because, as I mentioned, communication is first emotionally experienced than it is experienced intellectually. And again, the mirror neurons at play. When the team members who were all happily chit-chatting sees the leader who is pressurized, clenched jaw, foreheads having a lot of wrinkles on the forehead, they are coming in with the fists closed. Mirror neurons again mirror the same feeling. They get the team who was just chit-chatting happily. They get under pressure. Their fists are clenched right now. Their jaws are clenched right now. And then the environment of the entire team changes. So the first thing that I would want any leader under a pressurized situation is to pause. And that pause can actually give you a safe grounding for your presence, and then the rest of it can be, put in place.
Kavina, I think pressure makes or breaks a leadership role is what I see, because what we are talking at the moment is one way a wrong sentence under a pressurized environment can kill the trust is what we are saying, and one good message while in a crisis situation can boost the morale of the team, right? So that's the two pointers that we are looking. How, what does emotional regulation look like in language? You spoke about pauses, that is one way of looking at what is acknowledgement, acknowledging boundaries, decision statements.
Great. So, how does emotional regulation look like? So, this emotional regulation, right? Again, as I mentioned, the mirror neurons, whatever emotions that we carry as a leader is what is going to be passed on to the entire team. The thermostat of a team is a leader. So, emotional regulation, before we start speaking, through words also we show a lot of emotions, but the first emotion that we have to regulate and we showcase it to people is through our presence, through our body language, through the facial gestures. We know the framework of communication, the principle of communication. It was this Mehrabian's communication rule, right? It talks about 5%, 538, 50, no, 73855 rule. So what does it talk about is that 5% of your communication is actually your verbal communication, which is through your words. The rest 38 is through your vocal variety, the pitch, the tone that we use. And then the rest of the 55% is our body language. And body language is your facial gestures, your hand gestures, the body posture, all of that together. So now, if you look at these three topics of words or verbal communication, vocal variety, and the body language, through each one of this, the emotional regulation is exhibited. How does the body language looks like? Is their demeanor calm and sorted, or is it otherwise? The next one is when the leader starts talking, how is his tone, tonality, and people can simply, before he even starts talking, can understand what is it that the person is talking. And the third one is the words that they use, and that is only 7%. So that's why I say content is 7%, the rest is 93%, which includes our vocal variety and body language. So there's this beautiful thing about our human brain. So we are constantly scanning, are we safe? Are we safe? And we have, can you believe if I say that within 120 millisecond, any human being can detect danger. And when I say danger, it's not a big thing like I'm in a jungle and I spotted a lion, or it is a fire alarm that is ringing. It could be very simple as a tone change in the leader. And that could be detected by the brain in under 120 millisecond. So when the boss enters right at the door, people know what is his mindset, what is his emotional regulation, which is happening. And that is why the emotional regulation is very, very important. And that's what I keep telling, right? Communication is first emotionally experienced, and then only it is experienced through the words, intellectually, their contents, their words, all of that matters to people. I will just tell you a very quick example. One of my mentor, so he was a marketing head of a company. He took months of time to prepare a pitch, very important customer, present a proposal, basically a pitch deck. So he was all ready that day morning, too much of work, too much of preparation. He said, I'm very sorted, very confident. He went to office. He was standing right next to the slides, which has been already shared. He saw his CEO coming in, and then he waved at him, good morning. And his CEO just retracted the eye, He did not even have eye contact. He turned, let alone, wishing him good morning back. He just looked at him, turned and went. And that's again few seconds of him not wishing and him retracting the eye contact, looking against him. Now think about the confidence of that person who would be there on the stage with a very important customer. So what is that I wanted to mention here is that we may all do things quite unconsciously. The intention wouldn't have been that, but unconsciously we may do things. But when we are a leader, as simple as retract and eye contact can actually disturb our team's emotional climate. So, emotional regulation is very important.
I think what you're saying is it is more to look at a confidence that is there when a person is coming in, and how does the confidence go down when he's not, a gesture is done and that gesture is not reciprocated, right? So that's where I think what we see. What is the simple conflict script leaders can practice?
You asked one of the most important questions. Let's get straight to the script, right? And conflict is another key high stakes situation that many of us will be in day in and day out. So here are a few phrases that I would like to tell, which can be used in times of conflict by a leader. So the number one thing that I wanted to tell is to actually seek understanding or perspective from the team. So the leader can go ahead and tell that, help me understand your perspective rather than as what did you tell, help me understand your perspective. And number two would be, if we have a different angle in the conflict, here's how I am seeing it. It's not a universal fact what I'm telling. It's like, me as a leader, this is how I'm seeing it. Another script that I can give is, here's what matters the most right now. When there's too many conflicts coming in, how do we prioritize? And then bringing in commitment or accountability at the end of the conflict. So we say, let's align on the next step. So these are certain phrases, may look very simple, but what happens at the moment of crisis during a conflict, a high burning situation, is that it all goes out and then we start emotionally speaking. But if we can just have some scripts handy, I've always liked to have this phrases handy, script handy, so that it just jumps right out of us, not by emotion but by the intellect. And I even in the book I have this phrase book of how the new communication leadership communication is engaging, and I have put together a list of phrases that can really shift the communication for leaders. I hope this helps.
Yeah, it does actually. So what we are seeing is, uh, we should protect when we look at a pressurized situation is what we are saying, and look at calming down, provide a pressure protocol, pause was one of the pointer that you said, name the reality, acknowledge the impact, sometimes saying that yes, we are in a situation, but we'll come out of the situation, but we'll have to put our thoughts and see how do we look at addressing the situation, can also bring up the morale of the team. So that, now state the intent and also communicate, now we are in a situation, let's see where did we fail and how do we bring it back. So that is one way of looking at, there is a situation and we are coming out of it. Pressure does not create your communication style, it reveals it, because how you are communicating it becomes a very important point for the team to understand. At the in the pressurized moment, how does a leader communicate becomes the top priority is what I understand. uh, One last question as we are on top of the hour, how does communication intelligence connect to cybersecurity and trust, especially during incidents?
Oh, yes. And moments like cyber incidents, it is such a huge thing, right, for an entire organization, and the entire organization's employees' eyes are looking at them. So, in moments like cyber incidents, communication is the trust layer that we can have. The biggest mistakes that I have seen in cyber incidents are that number one, silence, when there's a long silence and people panic as to what is happening, blame, or inconsistency with respect to communication. So, what we can do in terms of cyber incidents is that strong leaders can, in the cyber, during the cyber incidents, let people know what we know. This is what we know so far, to give them the clarity of the situation. Next, what are we verifying so far? Where is the status that we are in? What are we doing next? And these three layers that we can add to communication, quickly trust is built through this clarity, even during a difficult situation as a cyber incident.
Got it, Kavina. So I'll take a few pointers where we have noted some of the important takeaways that we are looking at in today's session. Communication intelligence is a leadership system, clarity and emotional control, intent and trust building, repeatable even under pressure. That's the first point that we want to look at. Influence demands proof based language, outcomes, decisions, trade offs, and consistent follow up through across channels. So that's the way you need to communicate when a pressurized situation is there, and how do you communicate in different ways is what we are talking. Crisis and cyber moments are trust audits to look at how the communication leaders must communicate with discipline, what what's known, what's being verified, and what could be the next step. So that is the pointer that a leader can look at when there's a cyber or a technical challenge that we are facing, right? Executive presence is engineered through structure, pacing, and decision first framing, not personality change, is what we are saying. And with the fastest path to influence is measurable, few misunderstanding, faster decisions, strong alignment, and high stakeholder confidence. These are the takeaways that I had noted according to the questions or the pointers that we discussed so far, Kavina. Uh, any closing pointers that you want to give before we conclude?
Sure. Thank you, Prem, for beautifully putting together the entire 1 hour's conversation. If there's one thing I want to leave with the audience today, I want the leaders to be aware that when we are communicating, we are not just communicating to people, but we are communicating to the nervous system of people, which means it is going even more deeper. So the next conversation, let us not just ask ourselves a question that what do I want to say? Instead of that, ask yourselves, how do I want this communication to be experienced by my team? Because every conversation is first processed emotionally, than intellectually. So let's first build that emotional aftertaste in every conversation that we are taking forward. And that's what people will carry forward also. So that's something that I wanted to leave the audience with.
Thank you for that, Kavina. So, Kavina, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing a precision to something leaders often underestimate. Communication intelligence is not about speaking better, it is about better leading better, aligning people, accelerating decisions, and reducing risk at and building trust that survives the pressure as well. So, thank you for that. And to the audience, Kavana has recently launched her book on Amazon. I have brought the QR down here where you can scan and look at the book. This is doing a great rounds in the market, and I see it is making waves for Kavina to have this book done here. Congratulations for you, Kavina, for getting the book out, and it's great to have you here. And with this, we would like to conclude our show. And for if any leader listening right now hears the challenge that before the next meeting, decide what outcomes you want, choose three sentences that will move forward and deliver them with a calm authority, is what we want to say as a final pointer. And thank you for being here, Kavina. Uh, Good day and bye for now.
Thank you, Prem. It was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you.